Hello, I'm Sandra Kroeker from Brock University. According to this presentation, identity and agency are fluid, dynamic, and are situation dependent. Thus, one lens I use is contextualism, which is thinking that is subjective rather than objective, where there are no absolute truths or standards. Rather, events or elements take their meaning from the context in which they are embedded. These contexts are not fixed, but are variable and subject to manipulation and reconstruction. As well as contextualism, my paper argues that identity and agency are a negotiation between mind, body, and emotion, plus socio-demographics, societal, environmental, and quantum influences, which may or may not include non-human animals and objects. This approach is called posthumanism, which attempts to decenter the human as the center of the universe. In order to understand identity, one must understand how the person is integrated within the universe and what kind of elements are involved. This diagram shows my understanding of how the self is interconnected with the universe. The prism is the human being, and the rainbow represents our various socio-demographics. The far corner of the prism is the human being's connection to the outside world through the situation. Elements encountered in the outside world, such as societal and environmental influences, also affect agency and identity. What must be understood about this diagram is that it is not fixed or static, but a dynamic interplay of negotiations between all of the various elements shown. So first I will discuss the basic tridactic self, which is the mind, body, and emotion, then add the situation and intersectionality. Lastly, I will introduce a measure or tool for researchers to study intersectionality and agency while taking into consideration their dynamic, fluid nature. Due to time, unfortunately, I can't discuss societal or environmental or the more current and exciting quantum influences, which are depicted by the white light there. But stay tuned for the next paper that can hopefully talk about all of it in 8,000 words. In order to present the self as a basic negotiation between mind, body, and emotion, I need to trouble Cartesian dualism and binaristic thinking. Cartesian dualism came out of the Age of Enlightenment, where the superiority of reason suppressed and devalued emotion. The simple conclusion that Descartes came to regarding knowing he's a thinking being seemed to support the notion that reason is superior or more ontologically real than other aspects of the human experience. The effect of Cartesian dualism not only distorts the human experience, but also maintains inequality through binaristic thinking. Cartesian dualism assumes that the subject or the self can reside outside social relationships, when in fact we are integrated within all the relationships just mentioned in the previous diagram. Prout and James state that Cartesian dualism has yet to be overcome in the social sciences, and I say, challenge accepted. One way to trouble Cartesian dualism is to add a third substance such as emotion. According to Descartes, in order for something to be considered real or have its own level of consciousness, it must show it has causal influences. He calls this the causal argument. The causal argument states that if a substance can cause observable effects such as behavior, then it can be considered real. So for emotion to be considered as real as reason, its reality must be determined through this argument. An emotion can cause observable effects such as behavior because an emotion may arise without reason, such as fear. For example, an individual may hear rustling in the bushes and start running. The person may not know why they're running or what they're running away from because the mind hasn't caught up yet. Only later do they realize it was a bear or whatever. Emotion can have its influence over the mind because an emotion can arise and cause the mind to wander, thus affecting the stream of consciousness. Another example is love, because it causes behavior that would otherwise not happen. When a loved one enters our lives, it changes our priorities. The mind and body being distracted by love may have been used to justify the suppression of emotion. However, it actually provides evidence that emotion can influence behavior just as much, if not more, than thought. Therefore, because emotion can cause observable effects, it too can be considered an equal contender within the human experience of agency and identity. Schildrick stresses the importance of a post-conventional approach that focuses on a deconstruction of binary thought in favor of the fluidity of all categories and a recognition that emotion and affect are just as important as the material aspects of life. Take that, Cartesian dualism. Adding the fourth corner of the prism to the picture, which is the situation, given the dynamic nature of the universe, the situation has powerful influence over agency and identity. For example, using the basic tridactic self, The situation one finds themselves in has power over which element is more salient or highlighted. For example, a person with disabilities may identify more with their body in a situation where accessibility is an issue. Therefore, in that situation, the body is a more salient feature within that person's basic identity. Emotion may be more salient at a funeral, and reason may be more useful in a school situation. And when I say more useful, I do not imply that reason is therefore always superior to body and emotion all the time. I mean, one element may be more highlighted in different situations than another, making them all equally valid and useful, just at different times. When I say more highlighted, I don't mean that the identity will only be in one aspect or another, because there will always be varying degrees of participation from all three aspects. Moving to the rainbow, I've developed the acronym CORSAGES to represent the various socio-demographics, which are important to identity. CORSAGES represents culture, citizenship, orientation, as in sexual orientation, religion, socioeconomic status, ability, age, gender, ethnicity, and sex. These aspects, of course, are important to identity and identity formation. Stressing the dynamic aspect of the diagram, the situation also has power over the negotiation of identity because these characteristics also may vary in salience depending on the situation. For example, Sundar discusses identity capital, which is the strategic negotiation of identity that is dependent on the situation. In her interviews with Asian Canadian youth, in some situations, like in a dominant mainstream setting, it was strategic to bring down the brown in order to gain a social acceptance. But in other situations, like a family wedding, it was better to brown it up. This research shows that identity is fluid. Therefore, negotiating identity via the situation, one can gain the most out of whatever situation they are in, showing the complementarity of identity in the situation, not antagonism. Regarding disability, Rosie, a girl with autism, was not seen as disabled when at home because the social anxiety and street noise was not a threatening factor there. Likewise, a blind person is not considered disabled while talking on the phone. Therefore, disability and identity are provisional rather than marking a fixed identity. Identity and disability are a relationship, and that is relative to the environment. If identity is fluid and situation dependent, researching identity becomes problematic because research tends to fix participants to specific situations or scenarios. This is one reason why Kimberly Crenshaw and her contribution of intersectionality is important, because traditional researchers only look at one element at a time, like just sex or age or race. This is called single-axis thinking. This creates distortions of true experience of identity and agency because these things are compounded and cannot be parsed apart. Therefore, intersectionality is an important heuristic for countering traditional single-axis horizons. Given these problems in research, I have developed a tool that can help research identity and agency without losing their dynamic and compounded nature. This diagram shows the Corsages matrix as having a continuum line beside each one. This tool can be used by both quantitative and qualitative researchers and may glean some light in determining what particular characteristics are more salient in what situations. The participant could be given 100 of these matrices, and then when a situation arises, identify what situation it is and when at the top, and then make relevant tick marks on the relevant socio-demographic continuums. When relevant, the basic self, depicted as the flux capacitor here, can also be used similarly. When using this tool for research, it must be understood that the situation one finds himself in does not always change too dramatically over a day or a week. Things may proceed as usual for a stretch of time before something happens that makes a part of their identity salient. For example, I do not particularly identify as anything but a being moving throughout space for the most part, but when it comes to ability, my height is a defining factor of my identity in situations where I need to reach things on a high shelf. I blame COVID for that crappy example. All I'm saying is that one day the participant may find themselves using 30 of these, and another day not at all. Hopefully this tool can be helpful in respecting the dynamic, fluid, and compounded nature of identity when doing research. Regarding agency, posthumanist research discusses an active dynamic agency, making agency, like identity, also fluid and dynamic. A posthumanist understanding of agency places an emphasis on the mutual entanglement or entangled processes that involve many variables such as history, materiality, the body, culture, nature, etc. These are intertwined practices of knowing and becoming and cannot also be parsed apart. Therefore, identity and agency are fluid, dynamic, and a compounded part of the interconnected mess of all things. Thank you.